Okay, well, I have failed to come up with a snappier title than this. Obedience to God is ranked use of resources. Now, hopefully, that doesn't seem as contrived after we get through this, but I want to share with you some very important ideas. And we're going to start with a refresher on this diagram, which I am going to call the ladder to heaven, which is a heavy description, but that's what it is. Okay, so I've mentioned this in several presentations. I've gone into it at length in at least one. But essentially, what happens with this is that each one of these cells is a representation of your state in a snapshot of time. And it consists of everything you know, everything you do, all the reasons you have for doing it, all your beliefs, all of your feelings, and so on. So it's obviously highly abstract, but you could call it your character. And essentially, or your life, essentially what happens is something comes down from above and provides you with more information, a different opportunity, whatever, different ideas, whatever the case may be. A change in resources, some change, okay, to your circumstances. And then it leaves you with a choice as to how to react to that. Now, as you reconcile this new delta of whatever it is, let's say information, as you remap your understanding of the world to include this new information, it's like you draw a line, because this is going to add to your state, but it also gives you the need to make a distinction between what can abide and ascend and what cannot. And once you make that distinction, you cut off a whole bunch of things about you from the past, and you prime yourself to repeat the cycle by receiving that which cometh from above again. And that's how you ascend. Now, I'm going to talk a lot more about that, but not today. I want to focus on one facet of this because I thought of a way to explain this to you that I think is going to make a lot of sense. And hopefully it causes an epiphany in you as to how applicable this is to life, and also tying it into the book I wrote, Joy on Purpose. My goal is that at the end of this presentation, you start to realize just the size of the bomb that I dropped on you in publishing that book. So, I want to talk about treating commandments from God as binary things, binary instructions. What do I mean by binary? It's a light switch. It's good or it's bad, and that's all there is to it, right? Now, I call this Frankenstein commandments because it's either fire bad or whatever good, right? Church good, cussing bad, tithing good, alcohol bad, right? It's never that simple, but you have to start somewhere, and this is a starting point, right? There are worse things, but this approach is fraught with limitations. What are some of those limitations? Well, for one, it's all well and good if your situation is on the list. But these lists never cover any significant portion of real life. And what does this do? Well, it opens the door to being a Pharisee. So many modern religious people from all different sects fall into this trap where they say, well, my church gives me this list of things that I'm not allowed to do, and I don't do them. Therefore, I'm a good person, and I have a hall pass on everything else. Well, those aren't commandments. God just leaves us free in those things. We're free to do whatever. No, you're not free to do whatever ever. You're free to make a choice as to whether to figure out what Jesus would do in your place and whether to do it. But you're not free there's no sort of discretionary whatever. where you're just free to do whatever the heck you want and there's no consequences. There's no consequence-free zone. So that's a limitation. Another limitation is, how do you figure out those things that aren't on the list? Let's say that you surpass the limitation of thinking anything that's not on the list is a free-for-all, that there are consequence-free areas of life, which is false. It's very false. Well, how do you figure out what Jesus would do in those situations? Yeah, well, if you don't have a rule, you won't know. With this system, you've got nothing. Another limitation is that you don't have a way of handling situations well where there's at least some benefit to the thing. Now, maybe this is situational. So, for example, with the Frankenstein commandment example on here, I said alcohol bad. There are a lot of Christians who think alcohol is bad. And that's the end of the story, right? I have a friend, this is a true story. He was living in a super remote area for a long time, and he had an abscess. And this is a lot like it was in that movie, what was it, with Tom Hanks, Castaway. I don't know if he used a roller skate. I think he used a pair of pliers. He had to rip out one of his own wisdom teeth. And so he had a bottle of whiskey and he chugged half of it and then he ripped out his wisdom tooth. Now, whatever the particular circumstances for him were at the time, I think you could make an argument that there are at least some cases where there are worse things than drinking alcohol. But that also doesn't mean that it's always good. It turns out that you're kind of hard-pressed to find something that's always good or always bad. So, obviously, some things are closer than others to one of those extremes. But this is an enormous limitation to the Frankenstein approach to the commandments. Okay? So what's better? What's better is to see everything as a question of what benefits the most. It's to subject your idea of right and wrong to the complexities that exist in life. Now, some would discount this and dismiss it as some sort of subjective morality. And in a literal sense, it is, because it's absolutely based on your understanding of reality. But that doesn't make it arbitrary. So what's an example of this? Now, this is abstract, so if it doesn't make sense to you, that's fine. Just hang on. We'll get to real examples in a minute. But let's say that for whatever reason, you believe that thing X is greater than thing Z, and that thing Z is greater than thing Y. But then you find out that X, which was at the top of your list of value, can't exist with Z. They can't coexist, right? Like cats and dogs, like oil and water. They can't go together. And so you can only have one. Well, because X is greater, you decide to go with that. And now in your updated rank order, you've moved Z below Y because you can't have X and Z at the same time. Now, this might seem contrived, but you would be shocked if you sat and thought about it for a minute, how many things that we think are good cannot coexist. There are a lot of these things. So there's your example. We'll do more examples in a minute. What are the strengths of this approach? I've got some on the screen that we'll go through. One of them that's not here is the power it gives you against temptation. Now, that's kind of alluded to with the last slide. You know, you would not be tempted by anything that doesn't at least have the appearance of being good. Do you believe that? It's a true statement. And so one way to rob temptation of its power is to learn the truth, and a lot of those things just go away. But some of them don't, because they do have good in them. Either it's circumstantial or it's minor compared to a better thing, which is one reason I mentioned this coexistence bit. It's very important to understand that. We could go into details, but we'll get sidetracked very quickly, so we'll leave it at that. I'm sure we'll come back to it another time. So, how does ranking things give you strength against temptation? Well, because you don't have to see something as inherently bad. You can recognize that there are good things about it. There are good things about eating an entire chocolate cake. It just so happens that there are better things. The sin's not saying it doesn't taste good, right? The problem isn't that it doesn't taste good. The problem is that there are things that it cannot coexist with that are better. And so it goes. So by seeing the truth of ranked value among different options, you can strengthen yourself against temptation. What are some other strengths? Well, everybody can do this. You do this every single day. It's the least foreign thing in the universe to you. Now, you may never have thought about it before, and you certainly don't do it in all things yet. And you're not really paying attention to these things, the differential value between different options. But you have all the equipment and the experience to do this right this second. You do it every day, and you've been doing it every day since you were like 3. Okay? Your ability to do it has only ever increased as you became more intelligent and more experienced. Here are some scriptures for you. You actually get the equipment to do this as part of being born here. John 1:9. That was the true light which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. This is referring to the light of Christ. And guess what? You've got it. If you're alive, you have it. And then in Moroni 7:15 we read, For behold, my brethren, it is given unto you to judge, that ye may know good from evil. And the way to judge is as plain that ye may know with a perfect knowledge as the daylight is from the dark night. Now, daylight and dark night are binary things. They're opposites. But this isn't said to say that the difference between good and evil is binary. It's to say it's so dang clear. It's so easy to judge these things, to rank them, to judge their value and compare that value one to another, to understand the interrelationship between different options, like things that can't coexist, or things that have to precede other things, or things that must follow other things. It's so straightforward to do this that everybody can do it, and it's plain, and you can be perfect at it, up to the limits of your understanding, but you can do it perfectly. And this is very important because it runs parallel to perfection in Christ and what that actually means. Another strength of this approach is that it applies to everything. It's from the scripture we just read in Moroni 7:15, it's the way to judge. Or in 1 Corinthians 2:15, Paul wrote, But he that is spiritual judgeth all things. This isn't something that only works on a short list of churchy things. It's not something that only works when you're dealing in the realm of what people think of as religion. You can apply this to how to buy a washing machine. You can apply this to what trees to plant in your yard. You can apply this to whether or not to plant a tree in your yard. You can apply this to what kind of dog to get. You can apply this to what to eat for breakfast and when. It applies to all things, all the time. It's the key to understanding the will of God, which is the greatest benefit for all people through all time. He does that which benefits the world. Another benefit of this is that it's a framework where your prioritization of things can change over time, not just with your understanding. Paul said, when I was a child, I thought as a child. And that's one kind of shift. You can say, I really used to think the world of Jolly Ranchers, and now not so much, because I'm not a little kid anymore. But in other ways, it can shift. Circumstantially, it can shift. Like my friend who downed a half a bottle of whiskey when he was pulling his own wisdom tooth. Another strength of this, well, actually, I had another example of that. It's a trope from movies. It's in a lot of movies where there's some guy and he used to be some sort of bad guy, and then he repented, and now there's a new situation where he has to use those skills to help the innocent. And so it was bad before, but he's doing the same thing for very different reasons, and maybe for or against different people, and now it's good. And then finally, another strength of this approach is that it's infinitely extensible and improvable. Again, if your understanding gets better, so can your ranking. And if you find out about other things, well, it's really easy to extend your model to include them. You can just keep going forever. Coming back to this picture, you can just keep going forever. So added understanding would be an example of that which cometh from above, for example. Okay, so now let's get into some practical examples of this. So I want to take you now to my to-do list program that I use. This is, what is this called? Reminders on the Apple operating system. So this is actually my list. It's not super interesting at the moment, but I do have, if you've read Joy on Purpose, I do have a general list. That's right here. It's where everything goes in. And then I sort it from there. And these lists come and go. They depend on different things. And so this particular one is completely made up, but we'll just use it for this video. Everything else here is real. I do have a pig list. That's true. So let's go down this list. Wash dirty socks. Assemble a toy with child number 3. Do taxes. Dust furniture. Eat lunch. Wash car. Mow lawn. Fix broken faucet. Maybe this is my plan for a given Saturday, let's say. And so what I would do on this early part of the diagram here, referring to the ladder of heaven, is I would sort this, okay? And I'd say, well, the socks smell pretty bad. It's pretty important. That's going to be number 1. And for some reason, I'm going to put taxes as number 2. I don't want the government to come get me. I promised this kid I would do it, and I'm pretty confident that I'll get through all of these things because I don't want to disappoint him. The furniture, that could wait. If I don't cut the grass, my wife's going to yell at me. Lunch is important, but also if I have to eat late, whatever, these things are more important. And then that faucet is costing me money, so we'll put that right after lunch. I don't actually care if my car is clean or not. Sorry, that shouldn't be indented. So I'll put that after dusting the furniture. Okay, so here we go, and now it's sorted. So now, that which cometh from above. Maybe I'm looking at this and I'm like, you know what? I forgot. There is a lamp that's broken. And as I'm thinking of it, the carpet needs to be vacuumed as well. And whatever, right? And so I get these other ideas. Well, where do ideas come from? Now, maybe I'm talking with my wife and she says, oh, don't forget to take the dog for a walk, okay? And so on and so forth. And now I have more things than I can do in a day. So what do? Well, the next step of this is to sort of mix it up. And I say, well, I have to integrate this new information. And the lamp is more important than washing the car, but less important than everything else. Vacuuming, I'm going to do after I dust because I'm going to kick up dust everywhere and I want it to settle. And if I don't walk the dog before I eat lunch, he's going to pee on the rug, right? And now I estimate how long each of these things is going to take. And I say, you know what? I'm not eating lunch today. It's just the way it is. The line, right? You see the line? Now, this is what can ascend, quote unquote. This is what's got to go. Now, one reason I really like this example is that as I do all of these things and they go away, tomorrow's another day. And this line starts back at the bottom and we rinse and repeat. Now, all of these things in our example, if we were doing the Frankenstein commandments, would be, oh, eat lunch, bad. Well, it was today, but tomorrow's another day. Now, you talk about circumstances. If this were a Saturday and tomorrow were a Sunday, and I was celebrating the Sabbath on a Sunday, maybe there are things that I don't do on Sundays. Maybe there are other things that I do on Sundays. And you say, hold on, that's Frankenstein commandments. Well, I'll put it a different way. What if I explicitly focus on things that are more closely related to God on Sundays? And so maybe I'm not going to wash the car on Sunday because I will always prefer to read the scriptures if that's the only thing that I can think of. It's my go-to on a Sunday, let's just say. You see how this works? Now, you can do the same exact thing for, those were tasks. You can do the same thing for goals. You can do the same thing for beliefs. You can do the same thing for habits and many other things besides. This is the practical application of what it says in Moroni 7:19. Wherefore I beseech of you, brethren, that ye should search diligently in the light of Christ, that ye may know good from evil. And if you will lay hold upon every good thing and condemn it not, ye certainly will be a child of Christ. You're searching to maximize the long-term value. And it's something that you think about all the time in appropriate ways, and it requires you to be intentional about your life and to rank things by impact. So with that in mind, we've just touched on some things. I'm just pulling the corner back. I invite you to read or reread Joy on Purpose. And why, one of the reasons why it's such a bomb to drop on you is because of the value of the information that's just so plainly tucked into there. It's not hidden, it's laid out. But another reason it's a bomb is because I wrote the book intentionally, not from a religious perspective, because there are all kinds of barriers that people have and they don't realize they have. And so if you can come at it from a completely orthogonal perspective, you can bypass all of those barriers. And if you can read that book and understand it on a secular level, it's just a little hop, skip, and jump to completely revolutionizing your religious life and to actually generate an incredible relationship with God compared to whatever you had before. So I highly encourage you to take another look at that and to start applying the things that are in it.